So welcome. This is the first of our Q&A with Paul. So it's a sit down with Paul. So every week in our community, we do get thousands of messages come in from people that are interested in M&A, some people working in M&A. So we wanted to sit down every week and pick Paul's brains on some of these questions. So this week we've got some questions all around the M&A pipeline. So I suppose just to dive straight into it, Paul, first question, when it comes to building the pipeline, I think alignment with broader strategic goals is quite key. How important is it for companies to align their M&A pipeline with the sort of overarching business objectives that they would usually have?
Yeah, so I guess it really depends on the type of person that's acquiring. I think if you are completely new to M&A, you've not done any deals, and you're looking at, let me go out and find companies to buy, then I guess you've got to start somewhere. So it's all well and good being sector agnostic, but I would very much recommend focusing on industry that people know. Maybe they've worked in it, maybe they've owned a business in it. Really, that's twofold. What one is, when you're talking to business owners, being able to relate to them, talk their language, I think is important. But then more importantly, when we actually own the business, being able to pull the levers that are going to make this business more profitable. I think if you are a company that is already either made acquisitions or you're looking to make acquisitions, then I think there's tons of deals out there, and I think that when you get into this space, literally every conversation you can have can be, this is a potential deal. I remember being sat in an airport lounge, and I got chatting to this guy, and he was probably, mid 60s, and he was telling me he'd run this business in the construction space for sort of 30 years, and he was, of an age where he was looking to sell. So literally, you can be anywhere and you can find deals. So I think it's really important that if you are a company that's looking to make acquisitions, that you really make sure you have a strategy. There's tons of businesses out there, but whether they're the right strategic fit for you obviously will depend on your criteria. So what one company owner might look at versus another can be two very different things. So I think it's really important to sort of hone down what that strategy is. What would make the most tactical and strategic sense for you to acquire. So, for example, we've recently got involved in a commercial fit out business in the construction industry, and we've discovered that so basically they go into shopping malls, offices, government buildings, and they basically refit those premises and make them really nice. But one of the areas they subcontract is the electrical work, and in this particular business, so it's got probably about $15 million worth of revenue, and they spend about 6 million on electrical work. So they subcontract out most of the electrical work. So pretty much every project they get involved in, they need to basically get some electricians in to do all of that, and they're spending to the tune of 6 million. So in that particular business, we would love to buy an electrical contractor, because if we owned that business, we would then control more of the supply chain. We'd be able to improve the margins, and we'd probably be able to win more projects. So we'd be able to grow the top line, because effectively we have a greater capability and maybe more flexibility over the margin. So there's just a very simple example of how, for that particular business, that would be a very good tactical acquisition. So it's really making sure that you've got an aligned strategy. What does that look like? What types of companies are you wanting to acquire? What size will they be? Where will it be geographically located? Is it a competitor to buy market share? Is it something more tactical in the supply chain? And then once you've got that, you can then come up with a plan of, almost work back from it in terms of, right, these are the companies I want to go and acquire. Where do I find them? And then you can get into, building that pipeline of potential acquisitions.
So how would you sort of say for a typical business, regardless of whatever the sector might be, how can they really sort of define what their acquisition criteria needs to look like? Because I think a lot of people just want to acquire for the sake of acquiring to grow their numbers. Would you say that is a good way of doing it, or is it better to have a defined plan of how you're going to grow through acquisition?
Yeah, I think having a plan is really, really critical. So, what one acquisition strategy might look like for one person might be completely different to another, because every business is different. So I would start with really a long list of questions. What size will these companies be? Where will they be located? How much profit are they looking at? Are you looking in the distress space? Are you wanting to acquire, failing businesses that you can go in and apply your expertise to turn around, or are you looking to buy on the other end of the scale, really profitable, consistent, long established companies. So trying to define what that all looks like. Then I guess there's two routes you can go. One would be to make sort of strategic acquisitions, like buying up a competitor. So effectively, rather than trying to grow your business organically by spending more money on marketing and getting more business in the front door, why don't you just go and buy a competitor? Because literally overnight you can increase your business significantly, and then look at where you can improve that particular business with your skill set. Or is it something more tactical, where you buy something in the supply chain that gives you more capability? So, for example, I think it was about 5 years ago, we were involved in the digital marketing space, and we got involved with a brand marketing agency. So imagine they go into a client and they look at their brand and they do everything around the edge of that brand, whether it be web design, logo design, SEO, et cetera, et cetera. And what they were finding was they were getting a lot of inquiries from their clients that wanted PR services, and they just weren't in a position to be able to offer that, because their specialism was principally brand marketing. So their first acquisition was to buy a PR agency, which basically meant that they were then able to cross sell to those clients where there was already demand, and say, well, hey, we can now offer you those PR services. And I believe that sometimes it's easier to sell to a customer that you've already got than trying to find a new one. So they already have trusted relationships with marketing directors, and they were principally involved in the sort of food industry. That was their client base. So they could go to the marketing director of that particular food business, and then they could go and say, hey, you wanted to talk about PR, we can now talk about PR. So it really depends on whether you want to go tactical, strategic. Probably in most businesses it's going to be something that's a little bit more hybrid, where it's basically both. And then when you start putting those companies together, you can drive those synergies, whether it be cross-selling like we've just explained, or whether it be economies of scale, duplication of head office functions, and how you can maybe possibly consolidate those things to ultimately make the business more profitable. And then it's also thinking about the sort of non-comparables list, I call it. What is it that would be a complete red flag that would put you off the deal? So one of the things that is important to us when we're making acquisitions is we want to buy not just long established, profitable, consistent businesses that have been around for a long time, because you've got that longevity, you've got that sort of trading history. If they're consistently profitable, then it reduces the risk quite a bit. There's no major fluctuations. But one of the important things from our perspective is it's got to come with a capable management team. When a business owner sells and ultimately leaves after a handover period, there's always a big risk that custom can drop off, suppliers can get a bit jittery, maybe key staff don't like the new ownership, so they might want to go off and work somewhere else. And we want to protect all of those things. So by having a quality management team that's already in situ, that's already running the business with less reliance on the business owner, that for us is very, very important. Now, that might not be important to somebody else, but that's just an example of something that would be on our non-comparables list. So I think really defining all of those things, literally locking yourself in a room for a day and a whiteboard and brainstorming with your team, and asking them where do they think the opportunities are, looking at the sort of wider economic, political landscape. Are there any regulatory changes? Does that mean that there's going to be particular opportunities in that particular industry? If there's any major change coming, for example, you might see that as an opportunity or a risk, so you might want to stay away from it, or you might want to really jump in head first into those things. So I would really just sort of sit down with my team if I was looking to put a strategy together for a new business that wanted to go on that sort of acquisition trail, and I'd be thinking about all of those things.
Okay. So I'm a company. I've now got my sort of plan, my criteria of what I'm going to go out and how I'm going to sort of grow my company now through acquisition. So I think the first part of this process now is actually identifying the actual deal on the table. So I know what I'm looking for, but how do I actually find it? So you've been doing this for nearly 15 years now, and I think in the last 15 years the world has become a very different place. I'm sure there are 101 different methods out there what you can do to identify, but how are you identifying? How are you doing that in an efficient way? And which methods really work well and which ones should be avoided?
Yeah, so I basically say that building a pipeline of potential acquisition opportunities is principally a marketing activity. So when you've got your list of this is my criteria. You've just got to basically figure out, how do I go and connect with those people? Where do they hang out? How do I connect with them? What do I say to them? How do I get them to have a conversation with me about potential acquisitions? So, there's many different ways to do outreach. I'd probably say, for people that are new to this, your first deal is probably in your phone book. Think of people that you've worked with, know professionals that could potentially put you in touch with business owners that might be thinking of selling. That will probably be my first place. I remember the first 2 or 3 deals that I did. Basically they were all people that I knew, or I had a network that was able to put me in contact with those people. Because if you've already got a warm relationship, it's much easier to, I suppose, start that conversation and build a relationship than if it's somebody that you haven't ever spoken to and it's completely cold. But cold outreach certainly has its place. There's many different ways that you can source a deal. In some markets like the UK, for example, there's a lot of information out there in the public domain. So I can use tools like Endol, for example, where you can literally put in your financial criteria. So, I want companies that have got this balance sheet, that have got this turnover, that have got this profit. Maybe I want to look for companies that are older than 10 years, so they're longer established. I can play around with the data to look for things that are more consistent or have a very low debt ratio. And then I can get that data from Companies House, so I can get the name and address of the ownership, and then I can outreach to them. So I could possibly look them up on the internet and see if they've got an email address. I can send them an email. I could see if they're on something like LinkedIn, maybe send a message to them, or I can do the traditional sort of, send a letter in the mail, basically contact them and say, look, I'm an investor. I'm looking for acquisition opportunities in that particular industry. Would welcome an opportunity to have a chat. So there's many different ways. That's sort of more proactive stuff. You can do things like more sort of, I suppose, some of the fluffy stuff. So you can write articles. You can post those articles online on LinkedIn, in groups. You can connect in industry networks, and you can get your name out there as somebody that's interested in this particular industry. If you've already made an acquisition, well, you should be probably making a bit of a song and dance about it so that you get noticed. And all of those things are really about you building up a relationship with your audience, your target audience. So yeah, think really about where do the people you want to connect with hang out, and then go and find them. And then basically outreach to them. But before you do all of that, I'd probably just look at your own network, because you're probably sat on potential acquisition opportunities. One of the first deals I did was a company that I'd previously worked for after I'd left education. And the particular business owner was of the sort of age of potential retirement. I'd had a bit of a tough time through the financial crisis of sort of 2008, 2009. And I knew that the business had some challenges that potentially he didn't really want to face. I guess the time in his life and the stress and all that sort of stuff. So, I actually wrote him a letter to his home address. He then contacted me 2 days later. And within 4 months, we'd acquired the business. So, and that was somebody that I already knew, had a relationship with.
Okay, so just before we talk about the next part of this process, which is where we start talking to the business owners, are there any particular red flags that you think people should be wary of when they are trying to identify that potential company that they're going to reach out to and start this process with?
Yeah, so I mean, again, this will really be dependent on the criteria. One of the red flags for us is we don't really want companies that are in the sort of realms of being distressed. Where that's not really our model, but that doesn't mean to say that couldn't be for somebody else. What we're really looking for is a business that's long established, being consistently profitable. So we're not really after companies that have just had a massive, really good year and then it's gone back down. We really want to try and look for those sort of consistent profitability. We're looking at the margins within the business. Are they consistent? Are they growing? Are they reducing? Are costs increasing? Outside of what we would sort of, clearly there's inflation in most of the markets we operate in, but if there's been any major cost increases, if it's a particularly capital intensive business, that's not necessarily something that we will be particularly interested in. That's just a personal preference because of the way that we fund deals, for example. But again, that doesn't mean that to say that for somebody else that couldn't be right. But our model is really looking for profitable, consistent, long established businesses that we can basically go into and improve. Generally we find a lot of companies that we're looking at, whilst they might be profitable and consistent, aren't necessarily proactive with things like sales and marketing. Haven't maybe looked at whether there's any software they could introduce to automate some of their processes to make themselves more efficient. And I guess they're the things that we're looking at. And again, making sure there's a capable management team in place that are going to run the business. So they will be the things for us, but that doesn't necessarily mean that somebody else might not have an issue with any of those things. So it really boils down to having that strategy and figuring out what's right for you, and working out what your red flags would be, so that if you do come across them, you can walk away from the deal.
Okay, so it sounds like there's a few different avenues that you need to be looking at all the time, and this is coming in at the top of the funnel, and presumably at the bottom it comes out where you start actually getting to have conversations with business owners that are interested in either partnering with you or selling, or there's probably 101 different versions of how those initial conversations start based on the type of person you're actually talking to. Can you talk a little bit about how that first conversation goes and the importance of it? Because I think people have very different ideas of how that conversation should look like.
Yes. So look, I mean, I don't want to sound arrogant in any way, but finding deals is straightforward. It's a process. So figuring out your list. How do you connect with those people? It's a marketing campaign to have conversations with them, and then it's a sales process from once you engage with them to convincing them to sell you their company. So it's a fairly straightforward process. It's a bit of a long process, but it works if you follow it correctly. But back in April 2017, I saw an opportunity in the training industry, and I saw there was an opportunity to potentially build a larger training group by putting a number of companies together. So during the month of April 2017, I drove the length and breadth of the UK. At the time, I was living in the UK, so I was, 1 week I was in Plymouth in the south of the country. The next week I was in Edinburgh in Scotland in the north, and literally, visited 28 companies. And during that time, I had some very good conversations with people, but I didn't close any of those 28 opportunities. And what that taught me was that I'd basically spent a load of time meeting with business owners that, yes, potentially most of them wanted to sell, but either the motivation wasn't strong enough, or maybe their expectations were not aligned to really where we would be as a buyer. So what that really taught me was you've got to qualify your deals. So we don't meet really with any business owners when we're sourcing opportunities. Our first conversation will probably be 30 to 45 minutes. And that first conversation really is about trying to understand, are they motivated? And if they are, what's their motivation for selling? Is it retirement? Is it health issues? Is it something else? We're then trying to understand what their expectations are. And if they won't tell us, then we'll sort of set those expectations around telling them who we are as a buyer, what we're wanting to do, why we're wanting to buy the business, how we might structure a deal. So that effectively, if we get to the end of that conversation and they're not motivated enough, we're going to know that. If their expectations are completely misaligned to where we would want them to be, again, we can cut the conversation and shake hands and move on and move on to the next one. So some of the things, I think in the first conversation you've got to do less talking than them. That you want to get them. You want to build that relationship and rapport, because once you've got the rapport, they'll trust you. So, probably the conversation starts off more about, tell me about the business. Where did it start? Where is it now? Why are you thinking of selling? What does the deal need to look like for you? Those sorts of conversations. And during that conversation, you will want to get across key messages. So, when you've got that rapport and relationship, so this is probably towards the end of the call rather than the beginning, you're probably saying things like, let me tell you a little bit more about us as a buyer, how we're going to, what we would do the company if we ended up acquiring it, and the sort of process we go through and how we sort of typically structure deals. So some of the key messages I want to get across might be, we'll use a newly incorporated SPV to be the buyer. So it's basically a standalone company that becomes the acquirer, and that we're going to fund most of the deal or all of the deal with debt. And in terms of how we come up with the deal structure, we're looking at the assets of the business, because we're going to leverage them. We're going to have them taking the place of the bank, so they're effectively being the bank by being a seller financer. So there's going to be some sort of deferred note, maybe there's an earnout. We're explaining why we don't pay all the money at closing, that there's a deferred period, why that is, that we're wanting to protect the goodwill, the risk associated with all of those things. So basically, by the end of the call, they know that you're a willing buyer, that you're going to be a safe pair of hands, you're going to build upon the legacy, so you're not changing the name, you're not firing the staff, you're going to consistently run the business as they have, but maybe bring some improvements to the table. And you're telling them that you're going to fund the deal by debt because that's how it works. They're going to have a payout period because banks generally aren't interested in lending in the SME world because it's quite high risk. So by the time you get to the end of that conversation, they know who you are, how you're going to do the deal, and if anything you've said there is a complete red flag for them, then you can shake hands and move on. And you probably, if you're really serious about this, you probably want to be having 10 to 15 of those types of conversations every single week. And you'll probably find if they're done well, that maybe about half of those will then move to the next stage, which will be probably having a more detailed discussion, maybe putting an NDA in place, where you'll further that first call. So it's almost like a repeat, but you're just diving into a lot more detail, and you're setting more of those expectations. And then really by the time you probably speak to them the third time, we want to have a financial conversation with them. So we will have solicited some financial information. We'll have given them some sort of ballpark ideas as to what a deal might look like, so that, ultimately, if that doesn't work for them, probably at this point we've wasted 3 hours of our time. But when we actually make that sort of financial proposal, their expectations are already set. They're not shocked. And if any of the things that we would do would put them off, they probably fell out the pipeline after that first call. So I think it's really important to have that sort of qualifying, setting expectations call, making sure it's a structured process. So by the time you do get to making that financial proposal, there's no shocks, and probably more times than not, you're going to be able to move them towards hopefully agreeing and negotiating some sort of deal. So, most business owners will never accept the first offer, because if they did, they probably wouldn't be a very good negotiator. So they're probably always going to say no, or they're always going to have something that they're not happy with, or they're going to want to negotiate. But as long as it's not materially different from where you want to be, where they want to be, then you can obviously tweak and show some goodwill and negotiate and compromise, etc., to hopefully reach an agreement.
Okay, so it sounds like that first initial call is very much about partly pre-qualifying them without them realizing that you're doing that, building up that relationship so the conversations can move forward, and also dropping the first part of how this is going to work into the conversation, because I presume a lot of people, they must just initially think that, oh, you come along, you write me out a check and I walk away and the deal's done. And obviously the reality is most businesses are not bought and sold in that sort of way. So I think as those conversations progress on, there can be 2 or 3 conversations as you're explaining, you want to get towards more financial side of things. When you're managing that, so if you're having 15 of those calls every week, after a month, you've got a lot in your pipeline that you're trying to keep up to. So how do you keep that organized? How would you break down the different segments and sort of processes? Because you're going to have some that are first conversations, some that are second conversations, some that might be due diligence stages, negotiation stages. How do you manage each part of that process? And are there any tools that can be useful for people to use? Because I think when you start to get over like 50 potential different conversations at different stages, unless you're Elon Musk, I'm not quite sure you're remembering every single conversation that you're having. So are there tools out there that people could use that aren't too expensive? What would you recommend?
Yeah, so I think there's twofold in terms of why you would have a pipeline and why you would sort of keep it up to date and why you would monitor it. So I think the first thing is it gives us data. So we can look at breaking down that data, so we can see how many people are at that first stage, how many are at the second stage, how many are we making offers on, how many of those offers are getting accepted, how many of those deals are then closing. And then if there are any sort of anomalies in any of that, so if we're finding there's maybe not enough first calls happening, it might be a sourcing problem. If we're making a load of offers but not many of them are getting accepted, then either it's a sourcing problem in that we're sourcing the wrong financial profile of business, or there's something in our sales process that we're not doing that we need to tighten up on, which is really around education, setting expectations, etc. So you can basically look at that data at different stages and analyze, are we on track? Are we hitting our KPIs? Is this normal? Or if there's something that's not happening, we can look at those conversions and say, right, this needs to be looked at. So that's the first thing. And then the second thing is that this is a sales process. So it's not just about having the data, it's what we're going to do with that data. And look, if not every deal that you pitch will progress. So what do you then do with that data? How do you follow up with that data? So Very simply, a free tool that you can use to track your pipeline would be just to use something like an Excel spreadsheet, name of company, contact information, stage in the pipeline. So this could be first call, second call, NDA, financials sent, financials received, analysts, offer, term sheet agreed, due diligence done, completed. There are a few more stages, but you get the gist. So literally, I can break down in that spreadsheet using filters to say, right, how many deals have I got in my pipeline that are offer stage? How many deals have we got that have signed a term sheet that we're progressing through due diligence exercise? How many deals this year have we closed on? And then we can work out some conversions off the back of that. But let's say I wanted to pull off a list of all the companies we've spoken to that maybe we've made an offer to in the last year. I can put the filters into the spreadsheet, pull off a list, and let's say I want to call through them all and say, hey, we made an offer a year ago. How's it going? Let me check in. And maybe they weren't as motivated then, but circumstances could have changed. They might be more willing. I remember a deal I first spoke to back in 2020, just around the time of the pandemic. They weren't motivated enough, but three and a half years later, having kept in contact with them, they decided to sell the business to me. So it's rare for it to take that long. But obviously being able to constantly go back through that data, look at it, analyze it, spot problems, follow up with those people, that can be really, really vital. You can then use other free tools online like Trello. Trello we used to use, which you can sort of link documents to. It probably takes spreadsheets to the next level, and you can again sort of like use columns to sort of split down each stage of the process. We now use a paid for version, so there's many CRM tools out there. We've used things like Zoho, but the one that we found that works really well for us is Monday.com. So it's a cloud-based basically CRM platform. We can monitor the pipeline. I think at the moment there's probably around about 3,500 deals that are in there that we've maybe looked at over the last 24 months. So quite a lot of data in there, and you can set up automations in that. So you can say, look, if you make an offer and they reject it, you can get a calendar alert in 6 months' time to revisit that, or you can send out a sequence of emails, so it's all automated, so almost like your follow-up system is done for you. And the whole idea is to nurture them, build that relationship with them, so if they're not closing at that particular point in time, you're revisiting them constantly until such point as either they've sold to somebody else or they're willing to re-engage with you. So many different tools out there. Monday.com is not massively expensive, but when you've got 3,500 deals in your pipeline, you need something a little bit more comprehensive, I think, than using something like a spreadsheet. But certainly if you're starting out with this, as most joint venture partners that we work with, they probably start with a spreadsheet, and when it gets to a certain size, we can then put them into something like Monday.com, and we can import the data and set up the automations. But yeah, to start with, probably something just a list on a spreadsheet is good to start with.
Okay, and for more comprehensive things like Monday.com, just very quickly, what would you suggest that somebody looks to spend on their monthly budget towards a system like that?
Yeah, I mean, I think the way most of these systems tend to get priced is based on the level of data and number of users. So it really depends on the size of your M&A team and the number of deals that are in your pipeline. I think we spend something like $250 a month on Monday.com to manage that sort of pipeline. But we do have quite a number of users on the team that obviously have access to that data, because we have a team of people that work with that pipeline. It's not just all on me. There are cheaper solutions out there. We did use Zoho for a period of time, which was cheaper. I think you can sort of subscribe to that, or you could at the time, for somewhere between $25 and $50 a month. There's even free CRM tools out there, or you can use free tools like Excel or Trello. I would say if you're starting out, you're a business owner looking to acquire, maybe you've done a few deals, I'd probably use an Excel spreadsheet. And when that Excel spreadsheet probably gets to 250 plus acquisitions, and I'd probably look at something a little bit more comprehensive, because ultimately if you do use a tool like Monday.com, you can automate a lot of the process, and when that happens, that saves you a lot of time rather than you manually having to send an email or manually adding something to your calendar. Monday.com will basically do all of that for you and save you a ton of time.
Okay, so without sort of going into the full ins and outs of due diligence, because I think that could take up an entire half an hour conversation because of the detail that we go into, but there is probably an early part of the due diligence stage that's happening directly with the business owner in the first few conversations. What does that look like? What do people need to be asking? What sort of information do they need to understand so they can really assess, I suppose, early on, is this a deal that I can do something with, or does this need to go in my sort of archive and I'll revisit it in 12 months' time and see where things are up to?
Yeah, so I think the due diligence sort of starts in the sourcing. So, if you're focusing on a market where there's a lot of data in the public domain, like the UK, for example, you can pull up a company, you can see its ownership structure, you can see its most recent financials, even if they're abbreviated accounts. If you know what you're looking at with a balance sheet, you can get a rough idea as to what sort of turnover and profits might be by just analyzing that stuff. So effectively, they're not going to be on my target list for cold outreach unless I know they meet the right financial profile. So I think that's the first thing. I think the second thing is obviously when you're engaging with them and you're having conversations. In a nutshell, it's really trying to get an understanding of the business, the setup. So, have they got a stable management team in place? Are they long established? Are they consistently profitable? Is there any red flags in any of those things? So, they just won some contracts. Have they just lost a contract? How long have their key people been around in the business for? Is it a new management team? Is it more established? And depending on your non-comparables list will depend whether you're going to take that forward. I think obviously understanding their motivations, sometimes people might say to you, well, look, if you make me the right offer, I'll sell, but that doesn't necessarily mean that they're very motivated versus if you've got somebody that may have, unfortunately, some health issues that's driving that, they need an easier life. They don't need the stress anymore. Or maybe there's a personal change in their circumstances, which means they've got to sell the business. So trying to understand who's more motivated than others will, I guess, help you then prioritize the opportunity. And then it's really around expectations. What do they want for the business? How do they need the money for something specific at closing? Are they looking to invest? Do they not need the money? Have conversation around all of that sort of piece. And then you can figure out, basically, are they motivated enough? Have they got the realistic expectations? And does the business fit your sort of typical acquisition criteria? Most of the time on that latter point, you can find that out before you even contact them because of the information that's out there in the public domain. But don't forget that anything that's out there in the public domain is probably old data. So it could be a set of accounts that might be a year or 18 months old. So what might have been the situation then might look different now. So, asking them questions about, how's trading been over the last 12, 24 months. What do they see the opportunities? What are the risks in the sector? Are there any regulatory changes coming up that potentially could affect the business? Is there any capital expenditure that might be coming up? And depending on those answers, you can figure out then whether this is, still a consistently boring business that you want to buy, or whether something fundamental or material has changed since that initial research was done.
Okay, so I think having the right team of people around you in this sort of process is absolutely vital. Everyone's going to be at different sort of stages, so that could be like, I suppose yourself, you have internal people, but you also have external people, from lawyers to accountants to marketing people. But who are those sort of key roles, and how would you sort of build that team of experts around you?
Yeah, so I suppose recruitment and hiring great people is something that I'm quite passionate about because my first ever business startup that I did back in 2004 was in the recruitment space, and I used to spend every day preaching to clients that your business is only as good as your people, so hire better people, and obviously you want to make sure you keep hold of them. And I use the analogy that Richard Branson, a hugely successful global entrepreneur, he's got this space business. Does he fly the rockets to space? No, he doesn't. He hires the best astronauts from NASA and the likes that can fly these spaceships. So for me, I want to make sure that I surround myself with people that are smarter than me. It's okay to be the dumbest person in the room. Some of the people on my team are absolute financial wizards when it comes to sort of analyzing deals. They can look at things far better than I ever could, and I want the best people I can get to build my team. I think if you're starting out, obviously you can do every part of the process yourself if you've got the right skills and ability and tenacity. But obviously, as you grow and you want to take this to the next level and you want to start bringing experts on board, if I sort of describe where we are in terms of our team, I mean the core sides are the back office administration, so some of the admin work that needs to get done. You've got the marketing team, so people that will do the cold outreach, the marketing, the writing the articles, making sure there's regular content out there to our target audience, making sure that we've got that sourcing strategy in place, and things are being done with that every single day. We then have the sort of corporate finance team, so the people that actually talk to the business owners, build the relationships, build the rapport, manage the pipelines, make the offers, all of those sorts of things. We've then got the finance team, so the people that actually look at the financials, look at the deal structuring, and then post signing a deal, they'll deal with the sort of whole due diligence piece, and manage that process. And we've then got the legal team, so the people that do all the legal stuff, and again assist in the legal process, to assist with LOIs and term sheets and things like that. So, we have different levels of experience in each one of those sort of departments, but that's the sort of key team that's behind us, that we've built over many years. When I started out, it was just me back in 2010, 2011, and now we have a fully fledged team based around the world. We have that team in several different countries that we're building deals in. So, 14 years later, we've now got a great team of people. Many of them have been with us for many, many years, that basically perfect their areas of expertise.
Okay, so moving forward to, you've done your first deal, or maybe this is several deals in. How can businesses really sort of ensure that they're maximizing on the value?
So yeah, I think maximizing the value starts before you acquire the business. It's looking at the industry, where are the opportunities? Are there any changes that have recently come in play, regulatory, economical, political even, and then you can sort of identify where the opportunities are off the back of that. So before you even go into a deal, you've sort of got a rough idea as to where you think there are some real golden nuggets that you can unlock relatively quickly. And then really it's about then having a plan, and surrounding yourself with experts that can help deliver that plan. So that could be the existing management team, it could be external consultants, it could be external people that you bring into the deal. But effectively, we're really looking at fundamentally three things. Number one is, how do we grow this business organically? How do we get more revenue through the front door? So is that better marketing, improving all of that sort of piece? The second thing is then looking at the bottom line. So basically looking at the cost base, is there anything here that we're spending money on that we shouldn't be? Is there anything we're spending money on that we could get better value for? Or could we spend it in a different way? So maybe thinking about outsourcing or automating processes like software, for example, so that or maybe offshoring or outsourcing could potentially give a better and cheaper result. And so ultimately those two things will, you've got more money coming in, your costs are reducing, that ultimately makes the business more profitable. And then fundamentally it's about the M&A side of things. How do we build this business by joining it up with other strategic and tactical acquisitions? So how do we find competitors to buy? How do we find tactical acquisitions that's going to give us more control over the supply chain or greater capability, gives us potential cross-selling opportunities? And then it's about driving those things to happen. So like we've talked about in this conversation today, it's about having a strategy, having a plan, making sure that that plan's being executed, and build this business through M&A. So yeah, in summary, it's top line growth through better sales and marketing, bottom line growth through looking at better management of costs, etc., and then looking at sort of how we build this business by making tactical and strategic acquisitions. And when you start putting those companies together, if you've got the right people integrating and driving those, you can really, in most businesses that I've seen, you can pretty much double the profitability in a company within a 3-year time frame. And look, if companies are selling for a multiple of profits and we're buying at a certain multiple and then aiming to try and sell the group once it's put together at a higher multiple, ultimately the more profitable the group is, the higher the exit value. And I guess that's what we're all working towards, is to create that value for everybody concerned.
Okay, so I think there's been some really valuable insights that we've talked about today, and that you've shared from your experience and how you sort of do this process. I think for a lot of people, there's going to be some valuable sort of things that they can take away and they can obviously put into practice. But if somebody's here for the first time, discovering you for the first time, where can they find more from you? Where's your communities? Where do you recommend that they look into if they want to have more valuable insights like this, to really sort of move their own M&A journey forward?
Yeah, so they can find me online. So if you go to www.paulseabridge.online, that's my personal website, and you can link through to the various different organisations that we're involved in. I guess the core one for people that would be probably of most interest is buybuildsell.net. So www.buybuildsell.net. Our model is called Buy Build Sell. We buy a business in a fragmented market, we build it, and then ultimately we sell it. And there is a like-minded community of deal makers from all walks of life in many different countries. We have quite an active community where we share expertise, provide regular content. It's free to join, and you can talk to other people, create joint ventures, etc., etc. So if you're interested to join that community, just go to the website. You can connect with us, and you can talk to like-minded people, including me and some of the team, and immerse yourself in our world of mergers and acquisitions.
Okay, perfect. So thank you for your time, and yeah, we look forward to sitting down with you again next week.
Thanks, Ben.